I still recall a book that I studied as part of French A-level. It was by Guy de Maupassant and was a collection of 15 short stories. One of them was the story of a man who rows out alone into the middle of an isolated lake in the woods. Stopping to fish, he loses his oars and is stranded in the middle of the lake as darkness falls. He becomes increasingly terrified at the imagined horrors lurking in the woods and the waters around him, and is found next morning having died of fright rather than having succumbed to any worldly danger. Our imaginations can be very powerful, can't they? And we can sometimes foresee threats and dangers where there are none. But turning to the boat and the lake that we have in our reading this morning from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus and his disciples are in a small wooden boat on the vast expanse of the Sea of Galilee in a violent storm, the danger and the threat are very real. And the threats we face from the storms of our world, both at home and globally, feel very real currently too. Physical lashing storms across our country and our world, storms besetting the leadership of the church, and storms in global politics as we witness increasingly alarming behaviour from world leaders and influencers that rightly make us fearful. And it was at such a time in the world of global affairs that Bonhoeffer, pastor, theologian and 20th century martyr, found much of contemporary relevance and prophetic truth in this account of Jesus calming the storm. He saw it as Christ's exhortation to the power of faith in overcoming fear. Jesus invited the disciples into the boat. Perhaps he knew the storm was coming. Certainly he knew other storms would come and beset them into the future in the wider world and beyond. And as the storm sets in earnest, their rising panic seizes them. They wake Jesus up, and he rebukes both the storm and them, and immediately both are calmed. Their inner storm of anxiety and fear has been dispelled. And in reading this account today, we ourselves are given affirmation of the presence of Christ in the midst of any fears of our own, and of his power not only to calm us, but also the environment around us. In our callings as disciples of Christ, we are invited to step into that boat with him too, of course. And we should know that in doing so, the storms will come. We should also know in doing so that it's sometimes right that we would stay within the midst of those storms. If we believe and have faith that Christ could bid the storm subside, and it hasn't, then what would he have us find within it? Where might God's presence be? What might he be saying to us? What might he want us to learn as we listen, pause, and wait for him to act? So instead of praying for calm for ourselves, perhaps our calling might be to stay within the storm and have faith that Christ is present within it. But coming back to Bonhoeffer, he sailed into the storm. He spoke out against the rise of the far right in Germany from the earliest days of the regime. He spoke out denouncing extremism and the ill treatment and marginalisation of minority groups, particularly the Jewish people. He spoke out at a time when the broader church was largely silent, until he was actively prevented from speaking. His last speech on the radio was cut off mid-broadcast. He was arrested, imprisoned in Flossenburg concentration camp and executed by hanging in April 1945. Bonhoeffer sailed into the storm. He met with Christ and was blessed with his peace. A man who witnessed Bonhoeffer's execution wrote, "In almost 50 years of my work as a doctor, I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissively to the will of God." We are called to navigate the storms which we encounter with faith that Jesus is right there with us. We are called to trust and to listen to what he would want us to hear in the midst of all that roars around us. As people of faith, as a church, we are not called to simply row to a safer shore, but are called back into the storm to witness to the power of Christ therein. In all that troubles us, in all the storms we face, both now and those that are to come, may we have firm faith that Christ is present with us always. May we be assured of his power to act, and may we be blessed with the peace in our hearts, which only he can give. Amen.